Galante had reconnected with his drug contacts all over the world, but by now his crews had broken up and he needed to establish new ones. Galante had trusted Sicilians more than anyone else as he felt that they were tougher and more loyal, so he began establishing crews from his parents' hometown of Castellammare del Golfo, Sicily.
The imported Sicilians were known as Zips, and one of these Zips was Cesare Bonventre of the famed Bonventre clan, whose mafia ties went back with the Galantes all the way to the early 1900s in the US and Sicily. Another one was Baldassare Amato, and both of them would become Galante's bodyguards. In Sicily, they were still connected with contacts from the now defunct French Connection, and they established their own heroin labs in Sicily and processed everything there.
They also had members of Alitalia Airlines working for them, and baggage handlers on their payroll would compact millions of dollars worth of heroin into suitcases.
On the other side, in the United States, they also had baggage handlers working for them, and they would transport the suitcases of heroin without attracting any attention.
With the old drug contacts re-established and now using a network of labs in Sicily and the Zips to distribute the product in the US, the Sicilian connection had replaced the French connection, and business was booming once again.
Galante's Sicilian connection was bringing in an estimated $300 million a year with distribution to the US, Cuba, Mexico, and Puerto Rico. Galante was making all of this money, however, he wasn't abiding by the established structure of sharing the profits with other members in the family. Galante was keeping all these lucrative profits for himself and was creating a lot of unpleased members and enemies in the Bonanno family. Back in Brooklyn, it was the Knickerbocker Avenue area of Bushwick that was the stronghold of the Bonanno family. In 1975, the Pizza Connection was established. This was a complex system where the Mafia used pizza parlors as drug fronts. Food supplies from Italy were sent in tomato cans and olive oil cans where they would use false bottoms to store the heroin in. The cash profits were then laundered through a web of banks and brokerages throughout the US and overseas. Of course, Galante wasted no time getting involved in this system and began opening up pizza parlors of his own all over New York and out of state. He was also launching a campaign of destruction against the Gambinos where he was setting their businesses and pizza parlors on fire. He had torched or firebombed Gambino pizzerias in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware in an attempt to cripple their distribution hubs. It was estimated that close to $200 million worth of drugs was being smuggled through the Pizza Connection every year.
Now in the later stages of his career, Galante was involving blood relatives in his day-to-day operations. He alternated drivers between his nephew, James Carmine Galante, who was a capo in the Bonanno family, as well as his youngest daughter, Nina.
He also had a son named James, who was a legitimate businessman in Brooklyn, and Galante had not seen or spoken to him in years. Galante had been estranged from his wife Helen for years and was now living with his common-law wife Antoinette in a penthouse condo in the Murray Hill section of Manhattan at 155 East 38th Street. Surveillance detailed that Galante would get going at about 10 a.m. every day and would usually pause to chat with a neighbor or the building super.
His daughter Nina would pick him up to run errands, then to his business L&T Cleaners, which once stood here at 245 Elizabeth Street. It was said to be the only legitimate business he ever owned. He would then frequent several different hangouts and restaurants in Little Italy and Brooklyn.
Rather than having people come see him like a typical boss would do, Galante would make appointments to go see them.
He traveled around the city in various automobiles, none of which were registered to him. He never wrote anything down and only made phone calls from pay booths. All of his appointments were held at bakeries, restaurants, and waterfront bars. Galante was ever cognizant of surveillance. Lieutenant Remo Franceschini was quoted as saying, "No other mob boss would dare run around the way he does, without a gun or bodyguard and with his daughter as his driver."
He was still seen smoking several cigars a day but rarely drank alcohol. He continued the fitness routine he began in prison and exercised every day and would run along the East River. He also attended a local YMCA where he would play handball. He was also aiming to make his daughter Nina the first female inducted into the Mafia.
Galante often spent time at his vacation home in the Hampton Bays on Long Island, where one of his daughters and her husband lived. There, he continued his old hobby of planting vegetables. He also had a genuine World War II general's Jeep which he drove around the neighborhood.
His main consultations in New York were with Joseph Di Palermo, known as Joe Beck, who was another powerhouse in mob drug dealing and was Galante's drug partner going all the way back to the 1940s. He frequently consulted with his underboss, Nicky Glasses Marangello. He would also travel to Los Angeles, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Miami, connecting with 26 different mob families around the country.
On August 23, 1977, Galante was subpoenaed along with several other mobsters to answer questions before a federal grand jury in Miami, Florida. This was in regards to a meeting he had at a lounge in Brooklyn 2 years earlier, in which he allegedly discussed criminal activity in Florida with other organized crime figures. Galante procured the services of the very powerful and well-connected mob lawyer Roy Cohn.
Everything they've said is totally incorrect and inaccurate.
You believe they're not treating your client fairly then?
Pardon me?
You believe
No, I
that?
just said it's just a total publicity stunt, or all of you wouldn't be here, right?
Even though Galante wasn't charged with any crime, he still invoked his Fifth Amendment and didn't answer any questions in a 12-minute appearance before the grand jury. The following day, he was found to be in contempt of grand jury for refusing to answer questions. Less than 2 months later, Galante was found to be in violation of his parole for consorting with known criminals, including Joe Beck. On October 11, 1977, he surrendered to authorities. He was sent back to prison and denied bail.
While in jail, Galante still maintained control over the Bonanno family, and one of his instructions was to have 4 rival drug members in the Gambino family taken out. In January 1978, all 4 of them were cut down in the span of 3 weeks. Now in his late 60s and looking more like a grandfather than a mobster, Galante's violent streak hadn't waned at all. Going back to the 1920s, Galante had been suspected of killing or ordering the killing of close to 100 men in the US and Canada. In March 1978, a ruling by a 4-member panel of the U.S. Parole Commission had determined Galante was in violation of parole and would have to serve the remaining 8 years on his 20-year sentence. However, in a baffling turn of events, just a month later, the full 8-member Parole Commission Board had reversed the decision of the 4-member Parole Commission Board. The 8-member panel provided no written explanation as to why they made that decision. Soon it was revealed that Galante's probation officer, a man named James Gannon, had been on the mob payroll. He had been keeping Galante out of jail for several years by overlooking parole violations and had been on the mob payroll for at least 10 years. This new development caused months of back and forth legal wrangling.
In October of 1978, Galante was transferred to a low-security federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut. That's when feds uncovered information from a wiretap that hitmen were going to attempt to assassinate him while he was there. The contract on Galante's life came on the orders from Gambino underboss Agnello della Croce. Prison officials were alerted about the plot on Galante, and he was placed in protective custody under 24-hour guard until he was transferred to a more secure prison the following month. A federal judge eventually ruled that Galante's parole revocation was unconstitutional.
On March 23, 1979, Galante was released from prison on $50,000 bail.
That same year, Galante appeared on the network television program 60 Minutes.
They were doing a piece on his lawyer Roy Cohn, and Galante, who had previously been extremely discreet about having his face on camera, was now appearing on network television. He spoke with Cohn about his adoration of planting vegetables.
I'm gonna leave in the morning. I'm going to the country.
Good. What are you going to do when you get to the country?
Well, I planted peppers last week, now I'm gonna plant tomatoes.
You think that had an influence on the federal judge when he held that you were right and the parole commission was wrong?
I think so.
He thinks a farmer ought to be able to see, right?
I think so. I mean, it's very well known that that's what I do.
This was clearly a ploy, likely facilitated by his lawyer Cohn, to use the publicity of 60 Minutes to help improve his public image and make him seem like a harmless old grandfather. Nobody in the streets was fooled. By 1979, the commission had grown tired of Galante's cockiness and greed. His hatred of the Gambino family, his incessant need to control drug trafficking and to become boss had run its course with the commission, and they agreed to have him taken out. There was a majority agreement by the commission to have Galante killed, with one holdout. The boss of the Colombo family, Carmine the Snake Persico, was the only one who voted against Galante getting hurt. They even consulted with retired boss Joe Bonanno, who gave his blessing to have his once close ally and associate Galante killed. On the afternoon of July 12, 1979, Galante had arrived at Joe and Mary's restaurant, which once stood on Knickerbocker Avenue. He was having lunch in the patio area with his cousin, Joe Turano, the owner of Joe and Mary's, as well as his close friend and capo in the Bonanno family, Leonard Coppola. Also present were his bodyguards, Cesare Bonventre and Baldassare Amato, who were wearing long leather jackets in the midst of the summer heat. Just before 3 p.m., 3 masked gunmen pulled up in a Cadillac and stormed Joe and Mary's. 2 of them headed to the back while 1 stayed to guard the employees. Joe Turano's son, John, had encountered the hitmen in the hallway and had screamed to the back patio to warn his father, and he was met with gunfire and seriously wounded. In the patio area, Galante was sitting at a table after just finishing his lunch. The 2 gunmen stormed the patio and started unleashing a hail of bullets on all 3 men, and Galante was killed instantly, with his trademark cigar still clenched in his teeth. Galante's 2 bodyguards, Baldassare Amato and Cesare Bonventre, had escaped completely unharmed, which was very suspicious to law enforcement. And it was later found out that Bonventre and Amato had been offered a promotion in the Bonanno family if they set up their boss to be killed, to which they obliged.
Ballistic evidence recovered from the scene of the crime revealed bullets from more than 2 guns, which led to the presumption that Amato and Bonventre also participated in shooting Galante.
Angelo Presenzano, Galante's cousin and close ally for 50 years, was set to be killed alongside him. However, Presenzano had left the restaurant just a short time earlier because he wasn't feeling well. Presenzano was well respected amongst Galante followers, and it was expected that he would trigger an all-out war after Galante's slaying. However, Presenzano died of a heart attack just 8 days after Galante's killing. On the day of Galante's murder, the FBI had been running surveillance on the Ravenite Social Club, which was the Gambino's main headquarters in Little Italy.
A short time after the murders, Anthony Bruno Indelicato, who was a soldier in the Bonanno family, was seen consulting with Gambino underboss Agnello Della Croce, as well as Bonanno consigliere Stefano Stevie Beef Canone.
A witness in Joe and Mary's heard one of the gunmen utter the name Sal as they headed towards the back patio. Since Salvatore Catalano hopped on a flight to Sicily shortly after the murders, law enforcement believed that that person named Sal was his once trusted lieutenant Salvatore Catalano.
Galante's funeral took place on July 16, 1979. The Catholic Archdiocese of New York had refused the mass burial for Galante due to his notoriety.
Among those in attendance of his funeral were his estranged wife Helen, as well as his common-law wife Antoinette, his 5 children, and his lawyer Roy Cohn.
Galante's boldness could be summed up when he was quoted as saying, "No one will ever kill me, they wouldn't dare."
Even Galante's daughter Angela said that her father had a God complex and that he didn't think he would ever die. She also stated that she was surprised that her father wasn't killed much earlier than 1979.
Cesare Bonventre was promoted to capo in the Bonanno family at the young age of 28 and quickly built a fearsome reputation. At one point while Rastelli was still incarcerated, Salvatore Catalano was elevated to acting boss of the Bonanno family and was considered for the position of official boss.
Catalano was unable to hold the top job as boss due to his inability to speak English fluently. It was also revealed that he had previously been made in Sicily, which was a conflict to his American mafia status. His reign as acting boss didn't even last a few weeks.
In 1984, Cesare Bonventre was himself killed by mobsters Luis Attanasio and Salvatore Vitali. It's alleged that Bonventre had intruded on a heroin connection of the Gambino family and also unwittingly introduced undercover agents who were investigating loan sharking to other organized crime members. In April of 1984, Bonventre's dismembered body was found in a 55-gallon drum in a warehouse in New Jersey.
A few years after the Galante murder, new technology had allowed police to identify a palm print on the getaway vehicle used in the slaying. That palm print belonged to Bonanno capo Anthony Bruno Indelicato. In a major trial of the Mafia Commission in 1985, Bruno Indelicato was found guilty of Galante's murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison.
Indelicato was the only one to be convicted of Galante's killing. There are several varying accounts as to who the other two gunmen were that accompanied him on the hit. Perhaps Salvatore Catalano was the man named Sal that a witness heard mentioned in the restaurant. Other information points to Bonanno soldier Russell Mauro as being one of the hitmen who joined Indelicato on the patio. Bonanno soldier Dominic Big Trin Trinchera is often named as being the one who guarded the employees and also shot John Turano. In June of 1987, Salvatore Catalano was sentenced to 45 years in prison for his role in the pizza connection.
In 1999, Galante's nephew, also named Carmine Galante, who apparently idolized his namesake and was seeking a similar career in the mob as his uncle, had stabbed and killed a college student at a bar in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. He went on the run, and 2 years later he was apprehended in Long Island and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Nearly 20 years after the Bonventre murder, authorities arrested Luis Attanasio, his brother Robert Attanasio, and Peter Calabrese for the murder of Cesare Bonventre.
By this time, Salvatore Vitali, who was one of the shooters of Bonventre, had turned informant and was testifying against the other mobsters. Due to his testimony, in 2006 they were all sentenced to terms of 10 to 15 years in prison for the murder of Bonventre. Also in 2006, Galante's other former bodyguard, Baldassare Amato, was sentenced to life in prison for the killing of 2 Bonanno associates in 1992. In 2009, Salvatore Catalano was released from prison and moved back to Sicily.
The legacy of Carmine Galante is a notorious one, but one that is nevertheless cemented in the lore of mafia history. The delinquent boy from Manhattan who only had a 7th grade education would go on to speak 4 languages, become an organized crime leader around the world, and establish complex international drug systems. Not to mention, he earned the distinction of being one of the most feared men to ever take the oath of La Cosa Nostra, and even instilled fear in the hearts of other ruthless killers. From age 16 up until his death, Galante had spent 25 years in prison, which was more than a third of his life. Yet he never broke the code of silence. He never implicated anyone else in any of his crimes and never sought leniency by cooperating with authorities. Amazingly, up to the end of his life, Galante was never indicted for a single murder, although he came close more than once. Some traits are necessary to excel in the underworld, such as fearlessness, the willingness to commit violence, the ability to earn money, and the internal fortitude to keep your mouth shut and never rat out your fellow associates. These are all traits that Carmine Galante possessed on the highest level. Even in death, Carmine Galante left an indelible mark in mafia history, with the iconic image of him going out in a hail of bullets, with his favorite vice, which was responsible for his famous nickname, the cigar, still clenched in his teeth. Carmine Galante was born to live and die a gangster.